Good afternoon. Welcome. I think we're waiting for a couple of joiners, and then we'll get going with our session shortly. A few more coming in, and we'll get going in a minute. Great. Thank you very much for joining. So I'm Nick Winwood, Head of UK Partnerships at Headspring. I'm delighted to be hosting today's session, focusing on redefining talent strategy and in particular sharing ideas on how we might address the challenges that hinder strategic alignment. Today's guests will be introducing a research-backed framework, and that we will hopefully be providing some ideas and stir up some curiosity about how we might build and enhance our talent management strategies. So I would like to keep the conversation interactive. I will invite you all to engage within the topic. Please use the chat function, post comments, ask questions, and we'll use those throughout the conversation. And there will also be a designated section for a formal Q&A towards the end of the session. So a welcome to our audience. Sergey from next. I know that we've got guests from across the globe. Some are long-term friends and partners of Headspring, but those who are joining us for the first time, I'd like to just quickly formally introduce Headspring Executive Development as a provider of customized executive education. It brings clarity to lead through transformative learning experiences and addresses a number of L&D related themes, including leadership, talent programs as well. And as an organization, we're a joint venture between the Financial Times and IE Business School. So the FT, through its exceptional journalists, provides us with insight, context, and a greater external perspective, leveraging the details that our journalists can provide through the research and the conversations that they have with those at the peak of global geopolitical and economic issues that rapidly change the face of how we do business, how we organize and transform our business as a result of that, and ultimately how leaders and rising talent must then adjust to the trends of today. We're also helping to raise the gaze and the understanding of what the challenges are longer term are likely to present us as well. So this understanding of trends and challenges is then underpinned by the academic rigor of IE Business School. Next, Sergey. And then from that, we're able to draw upon, and we provide the learning and the research into some of the models and the frameworks that are used to support that change. We have a global network of educators, FT journalists, and business leaders and practitioners to lead and participate in these programs. And today's session is a great example of that. I'm delighted to introduce two of our speakers, Angela Lane and Sergey Gorbatov, both senior practitioners with hybrid careers from the corporate world. Angela is the VP Global Talent at AbbVie. Sergey, having held senior talent roles at organizations including AbbVie, Shell, and Philip Morris, and both also adjunct professors within IE Business School and leading the research that we're going to dive into today. So without further interruption, Angela, Sergey, welcome. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you so very much, Nick. We are so very, very happy to be here today. As you heard, I'm here today with my colleague, my friend, my co-presenter, Dr. Sergey Gorbatov. He is a writer, speaker, researcher in the complex science of human performance, and his goal is always to make it simple for us, which I know I appreciate so much. Lots of experience in real world corporate environments, organizational environments, and lots of academic rigor. A native Russian, he's lived and worked in the US, South Africa, Spain, and Switzerland.
Thank you, Angela. And it's my pleasure to introduce you. Angela Lane, a senior executive with more than 25 years of experience. She must have started when she was 5, leading global human resources function. She is an influential HR thinker, producing award-winning strategies in talent management and leadership development. She has lived, studied, and worked around the globe. A native Australian, currently residing in the United States, by the way of the UK and the Netherlands.
Okay, I don't think you're allowed. I don't think you're allowed to say things like that anymore. I think we need to give you a talking to. But let's talk instead. We won't give you a talking to now. I'll do that later. But I'll give instead a brief introduction to the journey we're going to take in the next 50 or so minutes. So as you heard from Nick, it is all about what do we mean, how do we define, how do we craft a talent strategy. So we're going to talk about what that means, how to define it, what are the features of a great talent strategy, how, if you've got a strategy, you could dial it up even further to get a more transformational impact for your organization. And towards the end, though, we are going to get, as IE very much likes to do, we're going to get practical. We're going to talk about how, if you want to achieve that strategy, you're going to need to ruthlessly prioritize, and you're going to need to sell your strategy to other leaders. So that's a lot of ground to cover. So we're going to dive in and get started straight away. So let's start with a little bit of research. And you also heard Nick say that the work we do is always anchored in the research. And this research comes from a survey we conducted. We conducted this with business leaders, and we asked them if they could share with us, how do they assess their human resources partners, their talent partners, their L&D partners? What do they want from them? And the analysis was easy because the themes were so clear. There were 3 things that leaders want from their HR, talent, or learning partner. The first is they want tight alignment between what we're doing in our field and their business strategy. They want to see that relationship. Second thing, they said, we want to have more clarity than we get today about these proposed solutions. The feedback is there are things that HR are doing, but that connectivity, how that actually makes a difference, isn't clear. And third, we'd like to see HR, talent, learning have the same sort of robust targets and measures that we see elsewhere in the business. There was a sense that HR needed to be more accountable to demonstrate the value that we deliver. So here is the good news. I was not disconcerted at all by those research findings, because I think the good news is that these are all gaps that we as HR, talent, and learning leaders can fill. We can fill it if we approach strategy a little bit differently. So knowing how to craft that powerful strategy is really going to be important. It's going to give us an edge, as it were. So moving on, what does that look like, that excellent strategy?
Very often when we run programs for HR, for talent management, for HR business partners, we actually bring strategy professors to unravel that question. And we start with the definition. And we know that strategy answers a question about what we will do and what we will not do. Opportunities or challenges may come from the internal or external environment. So we always need to ask our questions, what human capital outcomes must be true for us to deliver on the business strategy? That's our internal environment. And what human capital outcomes must be true for us to meet the market? So those are two fundamental questions that we would always ask when we go into a company to help them with the business strategy, when we would teach a course, when we would consult with someone, when we would advise a colleague on their talent strategy. So 3 qualities of a good strategy. The first one is it must be differentiated. Your strategy answers the question based on what is unique to your business and business environment. We often run a thought experiment, and I would like to do that with you now. So think about your talent strategy in whatever shape or form it exists. Even if it's in your head, imagine that you put it on paper and you go to a conference and you lose this. You lose your strategy. You don't know it. You leave it on the floor somewhere, and there are no logos or any other identifiable information that it's yours. Someone finds the strategy. Will they be able to guess that it's your company? Will they be even able to guess that it's your industry, for example? Your strategy must be so specific and unique that it must be crystal clear that it is your business. The second characteristic is it's integrated. It draws on all aspects of HR to get an outcome, which means that you need to deprioritize single-use solutions unless there is a very strong need for those, typically regulatory or legal. And finally, your strategy is dynamic, reviewed regularly as the business and business environment changes. And even if you work in a stable environment, think, how often would you go to your dentist for a checkup? Well, maybe once a year. Well, you know what? That's a good cadence to review your talent strategy. The answer is regularly. Yeah, so make sure that in the absence of any major shifts in the external environment or internal conditions and strategy, you dynamically and regularly review your strategy. So let's recap. By putting in place a few lean practices, expertly executed, you'll deliver strong routine performance, right? And that you will focus your resources on activities that directly contribute to your business performance. Your talent strategy is dynamic, responding to the changes in the business, and make sure that you review a strategy at least once a year. So let's change. Let's do a quick check on how you're doing. How is your talent strategy? And for that, we're asking you just with your cell phone, snap that QR code that you see on the screen, or go to www.menti.com and use the code that you see, 52640501, and answer the question, your talent strategy, or if you work in an L&D department, your learning strategy. If you work in talent acquisition, your talent acquisition strategy, because actually the framework that we're suggesting would work also for the HR subdivisions. It would work only even on specific solutions. If you're working on a capability project, think about, okay, is that a differentiated approach? Is that is it dynamic? Is it integrated? So let's see. All right, I will unhide the responses. Oh,
oh dear.
This is not on a scale from 1 to 5. This is on scale from 1 to from 1 to 10. So these responses are actually not that surprising. Very often we would see that when we ask people, at the first approach, the numbers tend to be lower than we would want. And we also would see that there is a wide spread of answers. We see companies and departments that are more mature in their approach, and we see those that are only beginning their journey towards a mature talent strategy. So Angela, your reaction to these results?
You know what? My reaction is, what a fantastic opportunity to join today. It seems to me that this is exactly the right time. If you're one of the respondents who reports that their strategy is perhaps not as differentiated, perhaps it's not customized to your organization as much as you think it might be, or maybe you continue to work on some typical things, a lot of work in progress, but maybe it's not dynamic, it hasn't responded to developments, etc. What a great time to have this webinar as you think about 2024. This is not an insurmountable problem, it is an opportunity.
Great. So next question is, what gets in the way of your talent strategy? Why do we get this results that probably on a scale from 1 to 10, when we're honest with ourselves, we would rate ourselves so much lower? Over time, we have categorized our observations into, well, 3 common shortcomings of talent strategy, and these get in the way of organizations achieving results from implementing their strategy. And the first of such is attempting a strategy without a strong foundation in place. The foundation is that talent or human resources work that is required in any organization, simply seeking reliable performance. This foundation is not a strategic response to a business need. It's undifferentiated. However, it's relevant to your talent strategy to the extent that if you don't have it, the absence of fundamentals undermines your ability to perform well. So you don't need it to have executed at the level of an integrated talent strategy. However, the absence of it will result in a competitive disadvantage, and high-level strategies are suboptimized. An example here, I won't name the company to protect the guilty, but we are aware of an organization that had an amazing employee branding campaign. Oh my God, their visuals were tremendous. The employee value proposition package, the candidate materials, like everything was so beautifully executed from the marketing perspective. However, their tracking system was a nightmare and candidate experience was terrible. So they went to the market with this amazing picture, with this amazing image that was appealing and enticing to the candidates. However, when the candidates got into the machine, the hiring machine, their experiences was bad because the foundation hasn't been laid out well. The second phenomenon we observe is a talent strategy comprising activities that aren't directly related to the business strategy. This sometimes takes the form of often sophisticated tools or technologies whose value is not immediately and intimately relevant to organizations' goals. Very often they might be, those bright, shiny objects that all of us are fascinated by, even though they are not related to business plans or external market forces. Do you remember a few years ago, I don't remember, probably it was 2013, 2015, around there, we were all fascinated by this movement, by this trend to abandon performance ratings or reinventing performance management, even though that had nothing to do with the specifics of individual businesses. Companies lined up to follow suit regardless of their particular business circumstances. So recently I had conversation with somebody who is working on a performance management design project for a small startup. And I looked at the design and asked a question. The startup is very agile, so they work in sprints. Therefore, their lead time to review performance should be shorter. Why are you suggesting a yearly performance appraisal? And the answer was, well, because they want to link it to their compensation review process. So, All right, so you allow one HR practice to drive another HR practice, even though business requires something else. So that would be an example of a generic solution. But if that is a small startup, there is another example from a Fortune 100 company that is about to change their talent practices to have it matched with Workday. No principles in mind. Why? But just because they bought this expensive, they've already invested a lot in this expensive solution. Now it's some sort of a sunk cost fallacy that they're going down the rabbit hole of chasing that. And finally, the third phenomenon that I'm sure that you're all familiar with, and we see it unfortunately all too often in talent strategies that are pursued by individual leaders or business units or particular geographies. We all have those markets or functions that put in a disproportionate effort in something, not because the enterprise requires, but because they can. Rather, the decision to invest in talent is based on one leader's view or local availability of resources. The fact that a leader has the ability to invest in a strategy doesn't mean they should. And there are many examples. One that I'm aware of, a very senior leader decided to build their own applicant tracking system because he wasn't happy with the one that enterprise had in mind. So can you imagine just setting up a new talent acquisition infrastructure just for one department? Or another example, when they had a head of function building bespoke executive assessments and leadership development programs just for their department and only for their employees, and building a little leadership development kingdom without much regard to the enterprise approach. So with these challenges or obstacles in mind, Angela, what's the solution?
Well, thank you, Sergey. So before we go to the solution, I just want to remind people we have the chat feature. If anything you've heard from Sergey, he has talked about what are some of the characteristics of strategy, unique, integrated. He talked about some of the things that get in the way. Any thoughts that you have, any ideas or questions that you have, please feel free to use that chat feature, and just know that Sergey and I monitor that, and we look forward to hearing your comments. And those comments are available to be seen by others. So it's a great chance to really encourage an online dialogue. If not a real dialogue, let me call it an online dialogue. But if we move ahead, let me tell you, in our view, that there is a model that actually offers to solve for some of those common problems that we heard about in HR, talent, or L&D strategies. And I'm going to explain each element in detail, but I want to give you the high level first. I'm going to share all the model, and then we're going to drill down. Well, the first element of the model, you actually heard Sergey refer to it a little, is that you do need a strong foundation. You can't build mature strategic solutions on that rocky foundation that we saw. But once you have that strong foundation in place, you can put in strategies that support the business. And those strategies are going to bring every single lever available in order to drive them. So we may be only working on a few things, but we're going to bring all of our efforts towards those integrated talent strategies. But finally, where I think I don't want to overstress the point, but we like to think the magic happens, is when, through the course of that process, through its activation, you are also changing the hearts and minds of leaders and creating this talent mindset. So let's look at each of those elements a little differently. We said it starts with the strong foundation of core practices. I want to define what I mean, because every business's core may look a little different. So if you keep these definitions in mind, you can ask, how does this apply to my organization? So when we talk about critical core, what we're talking about is the minimum that you need. So we don't want to do everything. The foundation is our minimum, because after that, we want to get strategic, right? So it's the minimum number of things we have to do that are critical to performance, right? So there are all sorts of things we can do that are fantastic, but we at first want to identify critical and minimum. We've got an example here of what we think is a good base from an HR perspective for any organization. You would want to be able to hire people well, people that can do the job. You want to get them to optimal performance fast, because you've got to run the business. That's all about performance, remember. You want to ensure that their day-to-day productivity is high. And that would be things like, do you have clear expectations and do you give people feedback? Don't have to do fancy systems yet. Don't have to do fancy solutions. Clear expectations, quality feedback, because that's how you get consistent performance, right? And then finally, learning and development. You will have gaps. No organization is without its gaps. No individual talent is without their gaps. So you need a development process to fill gaps, okay? We call these things critical because of that direct impact on performance. Whether you're a startup, whether you're a Fortune 100, I think, Sergey, you mentioned some of our Fortune 100 friends, critical minimum core is what you need, because that's our strong foundation. Let me give you an example, because sometimes it helps to give an example of what the opposite looks like. Let's think about something like 360 feedback, a great practice. It definitely supports performance, but is it critical as something that every employee can have? Would we say, oh, that's a critical element in performance? Well, probably not. It might be a good addition, but it may not be critical. It may be very important as a strategic approach if your strategic challenge is accelerating the development of high performers. Then it may have a really important part as part of a strategy, but it doesn't need to be part of the core. So really focus on minimum and critical. You could ask yourself, what is minimum and critical? To Sergey's point, whether you're a talent manager, maybe you're an L&D executive, you can ask, what is the minimum that I should be doing and the most critical for everyday performance, regardless of the size and scope of the business? Moving on, we layer on top this idea of the integrated strategy. This is really the heart of the work that we should be doing. This is, to us, this is like the heartbeat of the work of talent, of L&D. This is where we only have responses to business needs or external conditions. Remember, we talked right up the front, Sergey mentioned, strategy is either responding to a business opportunity or problem or an external reality. Talent shortages, regulatory change, etc. So here we're laser focused. So let me give a couple of examples to bring this to life. If our business strategy was, we're all about revenue growth, a lot of us will recognize it's all about revenue growth. Our integrated strategy might include things like reducing the turnover of sales personnel, removing low performers in the sales and marketing organization. It might include high engagement of our sales teams, and it might include training sales leaders in negotiation skills or training them in how to develop their team members. That's an example of true integration. One objective, one strategic objective for HR, support the sales and marketing organization so we can drive revenue growth. But there we engaged all the different levers. We had performance management was engaged. We had engagement as part of our strategy. We had learning and development engaged. All the levers pushing towards one outcome. Before I move on to the last element of our strategy, this idea of the mindset, you heard Sergey talk about this idea of the acid test. This idea that, you know, if somebody saw your strategy, and thank you, Sergey, you're going to put up another tough poll for us to respond to. Before we leave this idea of the integrated strategy, how are you guys doing today? Let's just take a pulse. You can use the Menti QR code to really, as I say, take the acid test. How strongly today, how directly is your strategy responding to business or market needs? So it's got rid of the clutter, it's got rid of generic solutions, and it's focusing on things. If you want to build business in China, your strategy is focusing on how do you manage expatriates. Your learning is focusing on cultural assimilation. Is that what you're seeing today? Strongly agree or strongly disagree? But how does it need to look, say, in 12 months' time? If you're thinking of your role as an L&D strategic partner, a talent strategic partner, how does that need to look in 12 months' time? You can see the QR code. I'm going to give you a minute and I'll have a little sip of my water. I'm seeing some good solutions here. I'm seeing some good data here. So we're about in the center, but we do see some real pockets of excellence. We can see that there are some people that are at the extreme, strongly integrated into the business. We can also see that there are some respondents who are probably still doing, some proven solutions. Perhaps they're doing some things in their business that have history. Sometimes Sergey and I talk about sacred cows, the things that we do because we know somebody put them in and they're deeply emotionally important, even if they're not as strategic as we'd like them to be. But we see that we're sitting in about the middle. But if you look at the shapes of the curve, what you can see is that on average, people would like to move their middle. They'd like to move the center to be a little bit more aligned to the business. But you can see by the individual shapes of the graph that a number of respondents feel they need to really move towards that stronger alignment that we'd like to see. Any surprises for you there? Sergey, you make a comment, but please, I'm going to remind people, pop something in the chat. Is this what you expected? How did you compare? What do you think you're going to need to do going forward? Sergey, before we leave this one, any thoughts?
No, the same observation that about the shape of the curve. I'm glad that the bulk of the answers shifts towards the right, but in a way that is, I believe, realistic. So this 12 months, people realize that, okay, we won't get to 10, because if we ask, okay, where would you like to be in the future? Everyone said, oh yeah, we'll be fully aligned with the business. But if we ask the question, okay, what are you able to do in 12 months? He will say, well, we'll be able to make small incremental steps. And I think that it's great.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of that. And so thank you, Sergey, because you're right. We do need to be realistic. But again, what a great time to set ourselves the aspiration, because we're coming towards year end. I'm sure you guys are like me. I'm thinking about what is my strategy for 2024. Maybe I could even set myself the goal to move the needle, just those few points towards greater alignment. And here is, move us along, Sergey, because here is the magic of us doing that. The better our integrated talent strategy, the stronger our foundation, the more magic is happening actually somewhere else. And Sergey and I call that talent mindset. I'm going to invite people to think about what they might interpret that in talent mindset. What you think of it and what it might mean. But here's what we think about when we hear talent mindset. That final element comes about when our leaders are seeing the strong foundation perform. So they're seeing their business be a high-performance business on a day-to-day basis, because the foundation of HR, foundation of learning, foundation of talent drives good day-to-day outcomes. Then they see this highly intelligent, thoughtful strategy that is giving push to their initiatives. It is answering their human capital challenges exactly, laser focused on where they would like that to be. When they see that value, and when we start to support them, I'll come back to that, their mind starts to change. Their beliefs about the value of HR, of talent, of learning start to change. And when their mind starts to change, their heart starts to change, we're building that talent mindset. So what's so magical about that? The magic is, I'm going to describe it as when we build momentum. I am sure you guys are so much smarter than me. You will know this concept of perpetual momentum. I've got a feeling, Sergey, that it was Newton, Sir Isaac Newton, that described perpetual motion. This idea that once something is put in motion, in this case a device, I'm sure you're familiar with them, it could continue in motion indefinitely without extra energy. This is the point, without extra energy being required to keep it going. That is the goal we're going for. We want to drive a great talent engine through the hearts and minds of leaders so that even when we're not doing new initiatives, they continue to drive the ones that are in place because they see the value. And that doesn't require extra effort from us. So how do we get to this beautiful position of a talent mindset, this belief in talent management, in learning and development that creates this perpetual momentum? We think two things. One is making sure that our leaders are educated. So those of you with L&D responsibilities, this is a call to action for you, but talent managers, HR leaders as well. You have to continue to invest in the development of leaders so that they understand the talent and human capital development kind of processes. That they understand high performance HR processes. Do your leaders know how to set great goals? Do your leaders know how to give strong, constructive, developmental feedback? Do your leaders know how to assess performance and potential? So we really need to do that investment so that as they're implementing our integrated strategy, they're doing it well, because we won't get momentum unless it's executed well. The second thing we need to do, and we're going to talk about this shortly, is they need to understand, connect the dots between what we're proposing and how it's going to support their business. Educating them in the strategy and how it supports the business is what gives them that push to help and be our best kind of allies. You can learn, we've got such a little bit of time today, so small, but you can learn more about this by reading about this idea of our talent strategy model through one of the great research papers made available by Headsprings. I think, Sergey, we have a QR code that we can show. Thank you. And if you want to do that deeper dive, I'm going to give you just 1 second to scan that QR code. And of course, we send you all these materials. So if you don't have your camera handy, that's not a problem. In the meantime, I'm going to go to a question from the chat. Thank you. It is, hi, Sergey and Angela. Thank you so much. Useful and insightful. We love to hear that. Talking about the bare minimum of the talent strategy, you mentioned that there's no need for fancy solutions at the beginning. For performance management, you mentioned the core actions, clear expectations, absolutely, quality feedback. What would you consider core for onboarding and learning and development? Great question. For onboarding, I am going to say, because we're talking about in the service of performance. So the minimum for something like onboarding might be as simple as, I'm going to make sure people have the laptop, the email, the organizational chart, so they know a map of their stakeholders and what their stakeholders are looking, their 30, 60, 90-day goals, just enough to get someone able to hit the ground faster rather than slower, rather than trying to figure that out. For learning and development, and Sergey, I'm going to get you to weigh in on both these, not fancy systems in my view. Obviously, it's great to create a good learner experience, but I would be focusing on what are basic skills that help people perform. It might be depending on level, can we offer people just some of the things that might be, time management, meeting management, these are not big courses, these are not long investments, the sorts of things that help people be productive on a day-to-day basis. Sergey, what about you? What's in your learning and development core?
I would say same, skills for the job. And for onboarding, I would say make sure your work is set up and you're connected to critical people. So
Fan-
that's it. So nothing to add.
Fantastic. Sergey, you want to take another comment
Yeah.
in
So
the
Vicky is
chat?
asking whether how finance and marketing have higher profile than HR. I agree. We always complain. Nobody's listening to us. They listen to the finance people. So do you believe that this has a negative impact on the leverage they bring with their strategic inputs slash asks?
Oh, can I Sergey, can I now
I've never seen a senior leader being negatively surprised at their HR partner being more strategic. Because when you are strategic, you are demonstrating an approach to allocate scarce resources to the areas that make your company or organization or business unit more competitive. And you're demonstrating your ability to recognize what's important to the business. And just by doing that, you're having a conversation at a much higher level. So how that can backfire, I don't know, Angela. Honestly, the only way how obviously any behavior can be overdone, and how can you be too strategic? Well, you can be too strategic if you're not operational enough. If you're then unable to put those strategy into action, that would be the downfall. But in our practice, and we talk about it a lot, for the HR function, currently we only encourage people to be more strategic, not less, because the most common feedback that our colleagues receive from business leaders is that HR is not strategic. That's been around our function for quite some time now.
And Sergey, one of the things I would add, just to honor Vicky's question, is, does it have a negative impact on leverage? Do you have more leverage if you walk in with the SVP title? I think undoubtedly you do. You start from a stronger position. I remain super, super positive around the comments you were making, though, which is, in part, you demonstrate your value. Okay, it may be harder to get into the room, but once you're there, you demonstrate your value. And here would be the example I would bring. Over the last, I now want to say 5 years, certainly 4 years, but maybe even more if I think particularly in the US of some of the things that were happening. Business strategy was HR strategy, guys. How do you respond to, and I say this is a US example, but I wanted to go choose from a variety. How do you deal with social injustice issues that we saw played out in such an emotional way? Geopolitical issues. If you're in Europe, you are no stranger to them today. You were no stranger to them a few years ago. Obviously COVID, and then the post-COVID return to work debacle, I'm going to say. HR has been at the center of all of those. And HR strategy and business strategy, out of necessity, were aligned. And if we give that up, if we give up that proximity to business strategy, that would be a deep shame. I hope that we have demonstrated, I believe we have demonstrated incredible value, and that value will be critically important to how we're seen in terms of our strategic input. But, would it be helpful to have a hierarchical title and power to support that? Absolutely. Michael had a question. How do you see the likelihood of a well-integrated talent strategy with outsourced partners? That is a brilliant question. Sergey, you can have a go at this. I've got some thoughts.
Let me read. Likelihood of well-integrated with outsourced partners. Well, the decision to go with an outsourced partner or do something in-house is a strategic one, and you would go about it in the very same way. How is it aligned with the business strategy? What's the external environment? And then you would look how it's also horizontally integrated with other HR practices and functions. So I know a number of companies that have gone with outsourcing their payroll solutions, outsourcing RPO, and RPO now is actually we've seen a swing towards everyone going in-house with the rise of LinkedIn and the ability of companies sourcing candidates directly. And now there is sort of a trend, a backward trend when the companies are trying to control for their headcount expenditure. So the RPOs are very common, and that is a strategic choice. And I see very many positive and successful examples of doing that, and that is being a part of an integrated talent strategy.
So, Sergey, we're getting some great questions. I want you to cover a little bit more content, and then we're going to come back because we have time allowed. We're going to come back to as many as we can. There's great questions on competency frameworks. There is great questions on core and risking that we fail to fulfill business needs if we just have a small core. So let's come back to both of those. They're brilliant.
Thank you, Angela. So we said that you don't just stand in one place. Your strategy is dynamic, you evolve. And as you get better, your approach is more sophisticated, you're mature. How do you know that you're maturing? So we would like to offer this model on how you can check up your own maturity, or you can have conversations. So for example, when Angela and I were engaged with different company, we asked them a set of questions, but what we're thinking in mind, we're thinking of two parameters: intentionality and risk tolerance. Intentionality is the degree of alignment between talent practices and business strategy. Yeah? You are intentional when you relentlessly apply the strategic approach that we discussed against the business need. And you execute it explicitly and deliberately. The extent to which organizations embrace this approach reflects a key aspect of the maturity of how you execute a talent strategy. The other element is the risk tolerance. If intentionality refers to the strategic choices regarding talent investment, then the organizational commitment to those choices is the risk tolerance. And examples of risk tolerance or the risk that leaders are willing to assume would include undertaking human capital investment, or making financial commitments, or facing financial consequences. If we don't do this in terms of talent, bad things happen to our bank accounts, or driving human capital outcomes despite uncertainty or potential for disruption, or insisting on genuine and shared accountability for delivery. So if we said that we're going to take big bets on talent, we do take big bets on talent, and we don't wait until they check all the boxes. So as a result, you have 4 scenarios. And obviously, we all want to be in the playing smart quadrant, where both intentionality and risk tolerance is high. Our strategies are well integrated with the business, and the organization supports those with right behaviors and appropriate investment. And nobody wants to be in the personnel administration box, which means that there is little strategic thinking, nor there is organizational commitment to the human capital agenda. So no one cares. But what do you do if you are in the box striving for average? And I don't know how many of you are in this situation, or you recognize your organization being in this situation. Your approach is sophisticated and strategic, but you are unable to execute it due to leadership failure to commit. Or maybe there is general lack of interest in your work. And no one is looking into what HR is doing. Or there is another scenario that we call spray and pray, because this one is problematic because resources are spent without recognition of organizational priorities or other solutions, creating unnecessary pressure and confusion. People don't know, okay, you do this and you do this and you do that. There is just too much activity without recognition of what's truly important. But knowing where you are enables you to articulate a response so that you're moving towards that right-hand upper box. So we would like now to ask you, where do you see your organization? again, go to menti.com and it will ask you 3 questions. So you would need to position your 3 variables. We came up just an example, just to explain the model to you, your talent management strategy. And let's include talent management and performance management, or however your talent management group is defined in your organization. Talent development, so this is your executive development, learning and development, anything related to skill building. That the group that is in charge of skill building, and your organizational effectiveness strategy. So culture, employee engagement, teams, and you can include organizational design in here. So on those 2 axes, on risk tolerance and intentionality, where are those 3 functions? I see people are answering. Let me open. All right, they're somewhat clustering around the middle. I'm very happy that no one is spraying and praying.
And we don't have any personnel, at least on average, where we may have some extreme.
So I think that directionally everyone is moving in absolutely the right direction. And you know, this model can act as the basis for a conversation about the maturity of your strategy. Yeah, if you're a consultant, you can use it with your clients to understand where they are. If you work in-house, then you can even use it in conversation with your business leaders to make them aware of their own behaviors and how their decisions have impact on them on talent outcomes. And you can use it to estimate the maturity of the performance of particular HR function, or even the appropriateness of a specific initiative or a program.
Fantastic.
Yes, so let's move on.
Absolutely. So what is this about? We like to say that there is no point watering a dead plant. What is that code for? It is code for the idea that you don't want to put your efforts into things that don't matter, or things that matter less. So even when you've got your strategy, even when you've tested it for maturity, you may still need to prioritize. You may still need to say, look, I can't do anything and I'm not going to water this one because it's not going to have the same effort as other things I could do. We have a matrix that helps people measure where they should prioritize from things that seem to be very good. What is the impact? What is the business impact this will have versus the effort it will take to deliver it? We can't go through that today, but just remember that even as your strategy is formulating, even as you're testing it for maturity, you may still have to prioritize. I want to also, sorry, Sergey, let me hand over to you.
And the final step, is the most difficult. Yeah, you can create the most beautiful plan, but unless you activate it and put resources behind, it will remain just that, a plan. And you can't activate a strategy on your own. So the talent work is delivered in daily routine interactions between managers and employees. So for each activity, you need to create clear expectations for outcomes. You need to let them know what good looks like. You need to make sure that high standards of performance are upheld, which guarantees excellent execution. And then you need to hardwire accountability through measurements, the KPIs that are difficult to fudge and that are visible throughout the organization because they create positive pressure on managers. So I know that we're coming up to the top of the hour, but I really wanted to take a couple of questions that we have in chat.
Perfect. And Sergey, let me ask this one to you, because one of your roles I know was actually heading programs for developing general managers. So that's a very specific business investment versus what you might think of as a core. So I think there's a conversation here about critical capabilities. But the question is, how do you balance the need for some of those generic standard programs versus business-related programs? The business programs can often be very specific or very, relevant per the function. But HR needs to stick to some of these core programs, and then we're seen as failing to fulfill business needs. Talk to us a little bit about how you drove business-facing programs, leveraging, in some cases, using some of the core.
This is a great question, and I will talk from experience. In that situation, I was looking after the commercial function, and the company's strategy stipulated that commercialization of our core assets was one of the four strategic pillars. It was absolutely essential. So when we sat down with key business leaders and the representative of the talent team, and we had a conversation about what our critical capabilities or competitive capabilities of the business are, that was a tough discussion to differentiate that. Every business leader says, my function or my business is the most important. So we have actually identified that there were several groups within the commercial organization that were more important than other, and the general management capability was one of them. So then in conversations with my HR colleagues, we agreed that we would draw on the enterprise solutions and enterprise resources to support the development of talent and progression of talent within the general management pipeline, so that we can grow that capability that has been recognized as enterprise capability. So it's really a series of conversations that need to happen, and the strategies need to be aligned. So that and when it's aligned, it's no longer an individual leader's decision that decided to allocate their resources without regards for the organizational needs, but you're aligning the enterprise strategy or the bigger organizational strategy with the specific needs of a particular function of a particular group, and then you're able to draw on other groups and functions, and you're given much more collaboration and support rather than you're just doing your own thing and being a lone wolf.
Thank you, Sergey. I'm going to take a question about competency frameworks. You can chip in.
Okay, yes, let's make it the last question, because
it is the last question. Competency frameworks, any experience to share? Absolutely. So you might consider a competency framework part of your core. If you do, our guidance would be just bear in mind that definition of core, minimum critical. Okay, minimum critical. We've seen competency models where there's a competency framework per function. So this is what competencies for sales, marketing, production, operations. Then they're by level for managers, directors, vice presidents. Then for each one, then there's a set of behaviors. Then for each behavior, they're broken down into people can't follow it. It is false precision. You can't accurately work at that level of detail. It's too granular to be useful. So just keep it critical and minimum, and then you can focus your time on, of these critical minimum competencies, which is the one the business needs most in order to meet its business strategy, and what levers can I pull from across the HR spectrum in order to develop them. Because it won't just be L&D, large part might be building the competency, but holding people accountable for it. Performance management, I'm going to drag that in, etc. KPIs, I'm going to drag those in. So yeah, minimum critical.
Yeah.
And on that note, I think we need to hand back to Nick.
Success profile. A success profile is, in my opinion, is much more useful tool when we're talking about building competitive capabilities than a huge competency model. So competency model is a tool. Theoretically, it's absolutely correct. Practically, it can result unwieldy to you. So depending on what you need. And if you had questions, just reach out. But I know that we are at the end of our time. And Nick, over to you for closing.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Angela and Sergey. Fantastic session. Some really interesting points that have come out of the research. 2 key takeaways for me from so many. I like the idea of keeping your strategy, your talent strategy, dynamic. So regular reviews are key. And the other point around a constant focus on those critical minimum core. So hiring, integration, the consistency in performance, and regular development as well. Thank you very much as well to the audience for the interaction, the questions, which have helped drive that discussion. There's a lot to consider, a lot to process. So we'll be sharing the session slides right after today's event. Clearly an engaging topic. So as a reminder, if you are looking to create, implement, enhance, or drive your own strategies and are looking for a strategic partner or aspiring partner to discuss some of these ideas, please do let us know at Headspring. We'd love to hear from you. Quick next slide, please. Before we go, just a quick reminder of an upcoming event we'd like to invite you all along to join us for. Headspring is holding our annual learning exchange. So if you could pick up your phones and use the QR code to register. It's an event on the 22nd of November. It'll feature a medley of insightful sessions in various forms, including a number of speakers from the business world, thought leaders from our global educator network, and of course, leading journalists from the Financial Times as well. We'll be hosting sessions across the day. We'll be looking at topics including AI, the future of work, a view into DE&I efforts, where they're falling short, how we can fix them, transformational leadership, and perhaps a very nice ongoing connection from today's discussion as well, cultivating a future-ready workforce. We look forward to seeing you there. But for today, thank you again to our panel and to all of you for joining us. Have a very good end to the day. Goodbye.